everyone. We're going to get started. Just wanted to say thank you so much for all being here. Obviously, it's been a really big day and run for this team, and we're so happy and proud to be a part of this movement and be here with you all. Here we have Senator Johnson, who has been such an inspiration and honestly a guiding light in this whole process for us, and his support for Bobby Kennedy, and so we're just very excited to have him here, and I'll let you kick things off.
Well, thank you. Thank you all for coming here. I was in the Oval Office about an hour or so ago and watched Neil Gorsuch, Justice Gorsuch, with President Trump present, swear Bobby Kennedy in as the new Secretary of Health and Human Services. I believe, I'm hoping this is a watershed moment for America. I described in Bobby's hearing that I remember when he called me and said that he was thinking about joining forces with President Trump. He was asking me whether he thought he could be confirmed. And the first words out of my mouth were literally, Bobby, this is an answer to my prayers. I'd gotten to know Bobby during COVID. We were trying to convey the same truths to the American public. I understand the price that Bobby Kennedy has paid fighting for children's health, fighting to get the truth out, fighting to expose the corporate capture of our federal agencies. I know the political and personal price he was going to pay for making the decision to join forces with President Trump, but I couldn't be more happy that he did so. It's important not only because by President Trump and Bobby Kennedy putting their differences aside and focusing on an area of agreement to solve a problem, it not only demonstrates exactly how you solve a problem. Let's face it, I don't agree with anybody 100%. So if I'm going to solve a problem, I'm going to set aside differences and focus on that. But I think even more important, it demonstrated to America what we are going to need to do politically to heal and unify a horribly divided nation. So to me, this is a moment of true hope. One thing I found out in all of my recent activity, whether it's working with doctors, looking at COVID and the vaccine injured, and those events I held, the event I held with Bobby Kennedy and Dr. Casey Means, her brother Callie, and all those nutritionists, is this MAHA movement. There is absolutely nothing partisan about it. I know Bobby in that one event said, I used to be a supervillain to him, the way I was portrayed in the media. But it's amazing when you actually get to know somebody, up close and personal. Those differences just melt when you focus on something so important as what is driving chronic illness. What has caused this incredible upsurge in autism? President Trump was speaking about that. It was actually a 1970 study. It's very, very hard to conduct this study, but they're trying to get some sense of what is the rate of autism, and that study revealed is about 1 in 10,000. That's back in 1970. Fast forward to today, something like 1 in 36, 1 in 34. I hear different numbers. California, it's 1 in 22. Anybody who knows a family with an autistic child, particularly a severely autistic child, this is a tragedy. These are tragedies that have to be prevented. We need to understand what's driving, what are the root causes of chronic illness, what are the root causes of chronic illness. We can't be afraid to ask those questions. And that's what's so unfortunate about this whole process leading up to this is people like Bobby Kennedy, they haven't even been allowed to ask the question without being ridiculed and vilified, and that has to stop. Because as I said in his hearing, the American people desperately want these answers on a completely nonpartisan basis. So, Bobby Kennedy is dedicated as the Secretary of Health and Human Services to what he describes as radical transparency. I'm the chairman now of the Permanent Subcommittee Investigation. I can tell you in my investigations, the federal government is opaque. They are so far from transparent, and that's a real problem. The government belongs to we the people. The information the government collects, the analysis it does on their safety surveillance systems, it's public information. it shouldn't be withheld. So I am pleased to introduce Del Bigtree from the High Wire, a man who has been engaged in radical transparency, paid the price. Now, I think you've probably been vilified, ridiculed every now and again. But this is about the truth. This is what the American people not only want, not only demand, but they completely deserve it. So I'm just happy to play a bit part here in this, enormous and a growing movement of making America healthy again. And again, at the forefront of that for many, many years. I've learned so much from Del Bigtree. I think Americans have learned so much from Del Bigtree. So, my hat's off to you. Thank you for all you've done, and welcome to the stage.
Senator Ron Johnson's been a lone voice in the wilderness inside of government for many years, and we are eternally grateful for all of the hearings and the things that he has done to bring awareness to the reality that is taking place today. It's very simple. This is a story that's been blown out of proportion. The misleading facts have been coming from mainstream press. The fact is this: vaccine injury is real. It happens. People are injured every single year. Children are maimed and killed every single year by our vaccine program. There are many that will say, well, it's rare. Does that mean we shouldn't talk about it? Do we talk about rare diseases? Do we try to cure rare diseases? Why is it in this one topic you are ridiculed, attacked, said that you're spreading misinformation for stating the obvious facts? My name's Del Bigtree. I am the CEO of MAHA Alliance, MAHA Worldwide, MAHA Action. But really, I'm just one representative of many, many incredible voices in a grassroots movement, a true grassroots movement for medical freedom that started many years ago and now has found real focus in this movement that we're now calling MAHA. I want to take just one moment to thank President Donald Trump, someone who is the first candidate that we ever saw dare to make the statement that vaccines cause autism, or that he thought that they did, that he wanted to do investigations into vaccines. And I'm not talking about this last election. I'm talking about the very first one. And every time he was asked in different scenarios, or whether it was on a debate stage, he said, I have seen children run across my office that were healthy, went and got a vaccination, and suddenly we're having issues spelling and reading. And we've heard the story over and over again. I'm one of those that has probably heard that story more than most, because I decided to do an investigation. I'm just like you, all of you in the room. I'm just a journalist, I'm just a reporter. No, I have no medical degree, but I did work for over 6 years on a medical talk show called The Doctors, where every single week I read medical journals to find stories of breaking news and science, and I learned to understand how to read that science. As Robert Kennedy Jr. has said the very same thing about being a lawyer. When I think, where is this movement coming from? What is it? I've seen all of the reporting. How far back do we go? Robert Kennedy Jr. began talking about this when he was first asked by parents that were coming up at his environmental hearings, where he was talking about mercury in the water, saying it's toxic, it's destroying health. And those mothers said, will you please look at the vaccines? There is mercury. The same thing you're fighting to get out of our water is being injected into our children. Of course, he was reticent because mainstream media and mainstream medicine scares everyone away from ever doing any investigation into that. But eventually a mother sat outside of his door with a stack of studies, and he couldn't ignore her, and he began reading. It's much like what happened to me. I was working on the Doctor's television show, and I was tipped off that there was a whistleblower inside the CDC named Dr. William Thompson, who was going to come forward and say that they were committing scientific fraud in the vaccine safety studies, specifically the MMR autism study. I made a documentary ultimately about that because, as many of you are aware, I pitched it to my executive producers. I know who you work for. I work for CBS. And they said, we're never going to go near that story. There is no way we are going to do a story that calls out the CDC and says that they're committing fraud of any kind, because we got to go and report on the latest flu epidemic, and they would let us behind the scenes, and we would make it into television, and we're not going to hurt that relationship. We're also not going to go after a product made by Merck, who's just one of the pharmaceutical companies that fund this show and fund most of television. As you well know, if you work in television, somewhere between 50 to 70% of advertising is coming from the pharmaceutical industry, which is why you're mandated to write the things that you write and told the things that you cannot write. So sometimes it takes courage to step out and do investigation beyond that. Let me show you very quickly where that investigation should start for all of you. These are vaccine inserts. I had my COO, Bridget Rasmussen, go by a doctor and say, we'd just like to see some vaccine inserts. Twinrix, I mean, I could read them off, Haverix, Shingrix. They didn't do infants, so we didn't get hepatitis B and those things, but I find it shocking, and you should find it shocking as a reporter, how many times I've read, well, the experts say, when Del Bigtree or Robert Kennedy Jr. says that there's been no placebo-based trials to establish safety prior to licensure, I would probably put money that none of you reporters have ever grabbed one of these and read it. Or if you did, then how did you write? The experts say that that is misinformation, because it's written in every single insert that shows up with every single vaccine that you've taken and that our children have been given. There's a very interesting conversation that happened during the hearings between Rand Paul and Senator Cassidy. Senator Cassidy brought up the importance of the hepatitis B vaccine, telling an anecdotal story about a young girl that he cared a lot about who was having liver failure. A tragic story, absolutely. But for Robert Kennedy Jr. and I and so many people in this room and thousands and thousands and thousands of parents, there is a story of a regression into autism, or of seizures, or of encephalitis, swelling of the brain in their babies after a vaccination, that apparently we're not supposed to care about that story. That Bobby Kennedy can't tell that story. That child doesn't matter. In the conversation, Rand Paul pointed out that hepatitis B is a sexually transmitted disease. The vaccine was developed for prostitutes and people that were having extreme sexual relations, or heroin addicts. And he said, I think that a parent should have a right to decide whether they vaccinate their one-day-old baby, which is when this vaccine is delivered all across America. You should be able to opt out of a hepatitis B vaccine, since it is unlikely that in the near future for a day-one-old baby they will be having extreme sexual intercourse or sharing heroin needles. So what is the purpose? And of course, Senator Cassidy, and I'm very glad that he had as many deep conversations as he did with Robert Kennedy Jr., but right before our eyes we saw what conversation can happen when reasonable people start talking about an issue that they've never been allowed to talk about before. Senator Cassidy, in front of television all across the world, had to state, you know what? You're making a good point. It is a sexually transmitted disease, but in mothers that are hepatitis B positive, that vaccine is going to save that infant. Senator Rand Paul pointed out, rightfully so, that every mother in America is tested prior to delivering a baby. We know whether they are hepatitis B positive or not. So why is every woman being forced to give their baby a hepatitis B vaccine when we already know their status? And right there, in front of the world, Senator Cassidy said, you know what? Okay, I don't think a mother should be forced to take it if she's hepatitis B negative. We just watched the first transformation of a medical doctor in an important conversation changing his mind based on the available science. That, was he unaware of it prior to that conversation? I don't know. Or had he forgotten about that? I don't know. But what we did see is a mind being changed. And so when people say, is Robert Kennedy Jr. going to take a vaccine away? I would say Robert Kennedy Jr. is going to begin a conversation of transparency, of talking about the actual science that is written in every one of these. lists pages and pages of injuries that are right here, written by the manufacturer by law because they are happening to real children and real people, and no one in front of me right now has ever written about this story. Why? How can you say you're doing your job? Who are you working for? We are supposed to be the fourth branch of government, the fourth estate. We are supposed to challenge these things and say, for how many years will we let these injuries happen before someone decides to make a better product or do a study and figure out, is there a test we can do to see if you're vulnerable to these injuries? We've never studied who these injuries are happening to. Sure, go ask the experts, just like Tony Fauci, who told you social distancing was science, and questioning him was questioning science itself. Just like the vaccine stops transmission, which every single one of you wrote. I don't know how many of you have apologized for getting wrong. But on the high wire one day before anyone, the show that I do online, before anyone received a COVID vaccine, I read the emergency use authorization by the FDA. And it said very clearly, this study could not prove whether or not this vaccine can stop transmission. So what were you writing about? Where was your science, and exactly how do you call the people that got it right the spreaders of misinformation? You have been the spreaders of misinformation. You have gotten it wrong, and America is still waiting for an apology. Yes. Let me get back to hepatitis B. Not only is hepatitis B a sexually transmitted disease, or shared by heroin users, so there's no reason a day-one-old baby should have to get it. Let me show you, I got it blown up for myself so I could actually read it. You can go to FDA-approved vaccines, just Google it, and every single vaccine in our program pops up. This is how easy your investigation can begin, if you decide to be brave enough to do the investigation. And then click on whatever vaccine on the childhood schedule you're curious about, and then open up the vaccine insert. 6.1 every single time. This is how this works. At 6.1, the clinical trial experience is written down. This is what they are telling you they did to prove the safety of a vaccine. There's only one way to prove safety, by the way. You have to have a safety baseline. In high school, you should have learned about the double-blind placebo trial. You have to have one group getting the product and one group getting a placebo that doesn't affect the human body in any way. And then we have them both. We track them, usually for years when it comes to cancer drugs. And it doesn't matter if you're dying of cancer. We're not going to let you trial that drug until we've proven it safe. Years we follow them. How long did we follow the hepatitis B vaccine trial group? It says right here, 6.1 clinical trials. In 3 clinical studies, 434 doses of Recombavax HB, you can look that one up, 5 micrograms were administered to 147 healthy infants and children up to 10 years of age, who were monitored for 5 days after each dose. Injection site reactions and systemic adverse reaction were reported 5 days. A 5-day safety trial with no placebo group. Look it up, it's there. Not misinformation, written by the drug manufacturer. I could do this with every single vaccine. Because of Donald Trump, we had a meeting at the NIH that I went to with Robert Kennedy Jr. when he was first president. And we said, why in all of these can we not find a single placebo trial of any of the childhood vaccines? Are you not doing placebo trials and establishing safety the way every other drug is established? Or are you just not publishing those trials? There was silence in the room, and finally Tony Fauci admitted, we don't do placebo trials on vaccines because it would be unethical. Unethical. For a vaccine like Gardasil, the first time they were going to try and deal with cancer, the vaccine, they had a belief that it was safe because they never did a proper placebo trial to test if it was. We just had an RSV vaccine just a couple of months ago, by the way, that finally had a saline placebo trial, and they stopped it because babies were getting sick, and it was clear that the vaccine was hurting children. Is that just because it was the first placebo-based trial we'd ever seen in a childhood vaccine? And let me say this unequivocally, if I ever see you write in your paper that the experts say a placebo trial was done, then you better print it in that article, and I've said that to all of you, and send it to me and Robert Kennedy Jr., because at the NIH, Tony Fauci and Francis Collins admitted we don't do them. So what does that mean? What does that mean for the safety of our babies and our children? A day one old baby is getting a product that we only cared to test for 5 days. Does a healthy child not deserve better than that? Because a cancer patient does. Our grandparents get products that are against placebo for years. Why are our babies not mattering? And by the way, America has the highest rate of first-day baby deaths in the industrialized world, reported by CBS. Is that caused by hepatitis B? I don't know. Is it caused by bad hospitals? Are we a third world nation? Do we not know how to treat a day one old baby? Robert Kennedy Jr. is about to start having investigations into these horrible stats. And for anyone that says there's no such thing as vaccine injury, that's curious, because written right here in 6.2, since you only did a 5-day safety trial, we are left with the post-marketing surveillance. I'd point out nervous system disorders for hepatitis B given to a day one old baby. Guillain-Barré syndrome, that's paralysis. And by the way, prior to a polio vaccine, that would have been called poliomyelitis. Paralysis still exists. It's still happening. Now it's a side effect of vaccination. Multiple sclerosis, exacerbation of multiple sclerosis, myelitis, including transverse myelitis, all paralytic diseases written here as being caused by a vaccination. Now you could say how many, but is that the only question? Do we actually live in a country where we're going to allow this to happen to anybody, especially a day one old baby? Let me continue. Seizures, febrile seizures, peripheral neuropathy, Bell's palsy, radiculopathy, herpes zoster, migraine, muscle weakness, hyperthesia, and encephalitis, brain swelling. Open up every one of these vaccines in the childhood schedule, and you will find encephalitis, a brain swelling event. Is it that shocking, really? Since the vaccine is designed to cause an inflammatory event to get your immune system to kick into gear. That's why they put neurotoxins like aluminum in the vaccine, so it will incite your immune system to swell your body. And if you're unfortunate enough that that swelling happens in your brain, now you're at risk of the symptoms and side effects of a brain swelling event, which, yes, can be autism. It can be Tourette's. It can be ADD, ADHD. This is science, folks. It's not misinformation. Now, is vaccines the only thing that could maybe contribute to autism, which, as has been pointed out, has gone from 1 in 20,000 to 1 in 36? It's more prevalent in boys, so we're talking now 1 in 22 to 1 in 18 boys. Why aren't you writing about this? Is this not an epidemic of disastrous proportions? Is it that hard to understand the science? Do you have to have a medical degree to say that a brain swelling event that is written in the side effects here couldn't possibly lead to a neurological disorder? Certainly you're all smarter than that. But you were the ones that have been gaslighting hundreds of thousands of parents that witnessed with their own eyes vaccine injury. You were the reason no doctor ever learns how to fix vaccine injury. We know how to handle a drug overdose because we can talk about that. And the doctors that do investigate how to possibly reverse transverse myelitis or Guillain-Barré syndrome the moment it's happening, a brain swelling event, you were ridiculing them. You were supporting a medical establishment that attacks that doctor for daring to say vaccines cause injury. You were a part of the greatest lie any modern society has ever told. How do you feel? Do you really believe? Is there something in you that has you saying vaccines, that he's wrong? Vaccines don't cause injury. You're only going to sit in two places. Either it's real, but it's rare, and I don't care about those babies. They don't matter. The greater good is all that matters. Or you're going to live in a completely blind place, which is it doesn't matter that's written on every single one of these things. I believe somehow the pharmaceutical industry has made a product that has no side effects. Good luck with that. The world just changed today. Now you'll have to decide whether you want to report on real science, because that is what you are about to see. Robert Kennedy Jr. doesn't need to eradicate any vaccine from the program. He just needs to show you how long the safety trial was. He just needs to make available to you and make sure that doctors give you true informed consent, that these are known side effects, that we haven't done proper trials to know how long they would be. Had we done placebo trials, we would have answers to those things. How often are these things happening? But remember, I just read 20 side effects of a list of about 60, and every single time, every injection, you are taking that risk of 60 different side effects for that one vaccine over and over and over again, 72 times, and counting and growing. We are rolling the dice. If transverse myelitis is rare, and encephalitis is rare, and multiple sclerosis is rare, and thrombocytopenia is rare, and myocarditis is rare, and pericarditis is rare, how long before all of those added together start moving out of the category of rare, because they're all stacked on top of each other every time we do this? No one is trying to eradicate a vaccine program. What we're trying to do is say, we need to do studies. We have never looked at the entire vaccine program, ever. We've never, ever looked at those that got all 72 of their vaccines compared to those that got none. We asked the NIH to do that study, Robert Kennedy Jr. and I did, and a team of scientists. Why won't you do a retrospective study? If a prospective study, meaning having a placebo group and denying them of your faith-based religion that it is perfectly safe even before a trial, will you at least do a retrospective study of the vaccine safety data link, which has 10 million people in it, tens of thousands of unvaccinated individuals, which the Institute of Medicine said is perfectly capable of doing a full, well-powered study, comparative study between the unvaccinated and the vaccinated. Back in 2017, the NIH, Francis Collins and Tony Fauci said, we will never do that study. You're journalists. Your job, like mine, like a detective, is to come up with motive. What would be the motive for the largest, most powerful scientific institution in the world, filled with the greatest scientific minds, to not do the most obvious comparative study? Do you think they haven't done it? Do you think they want me at this microphone today? Do you think they want Robert Kennedy Jr. now the head of HHS because so many people now know the truth that you've never written about? Do you think they wanted to stop this? Do you think they don't realize if they'd have done a comparative study between the vaccinated individuals and the unvaccinated individuals and proved to the world that the vaccinated have less cancer, less ADD, ADHD, less lupus, less asthma, less autism? Don't you think you would have been printing that at the headline of every one of your newspapers? Don't you think they've run that study so that they could end this conversation forever? Come on. Where is your common sense? Where is your common duty as journalists to tell the world the truth? I'll answer questions in a moment. And that's just one issue. This movement expanded from being a health freedom movement, a movement fighting for informed consent and the right to decide what is injected into your children, the right to decide what is fed to your children. Callie Means and Casey Means brought the food health awareness movement together at the moment Robert Kennedy Jr. joined forces with President Trump. There were no buses paid by George Soros to fill people to support Robert Kennedy Jr. He had millions and millions and millions of people around the world and across this country that showed up in record numbers to vote, many of them outside of their party, for President Donald Trump. This movement is real. It's the real thing, driven by moms that are tired of the media lying to them. And you have ruined all of your power because in your 24-hour-a-day news cycle, spreading lies about Robert Kennedy Jr., lies about the safety of all of these products, including the chemicals that are in our food that's finally being reported upon. Where were you in the 10 years that Kellogg's was poisoning our children in America, but not poisoning them in America because they're making a different product? Where were you? Who are you? Why did you start this job? Am I that different than you that I wanted to do an investigation? That my curiosity could not be stopped just because my executive producer said we're not going to look into that story? We don't cover that? Well, everyone that did has now changed the world. They just got their HHS secretary. They just got their president. And you're going to have to think about what you do from here. What I'm going to do as Robert Kennedy Jr. brings the MAHA movement and idea into the regulatory agencies, as he starts doing the studies and science that we've been asking for decades, as he stops gaslighting people saying, we can't figure out what's causing autism. We're the greatest scientists in the world and the greatest nation in the world, but we can't figure out a problem that's gone from 1 in 10,000 to 1 in 34. Either someone's lying or someone needs to be fired. And that's about to start today. We're going to get answers to this, I guarantee you. We are the home of Microsoft. We've always been the home of Apple. We're the home of AI and computer learning. I guarantee you that vaccine safety data link database is perfectly capable of being looked at by computer programs and starting to do cross-references. That is what we do. That is science. How has that not happened up until this moment? Why is it going to finally take Robert Kennedy Jr. to do that? Well, that's going to happen, and that's all we want. Radical transparency. And all I want from the news is radical truth. If you're being asked to be shills and pump out lies, quit. Start a podcast. Do something helpful for this country. MAHA is a movement. Today we'll be just launching a brand new website with almost nothing on it called maha.io. My job as Director of Communications for Robert Kennedy Jr. is now over, as of just over an hour ago when I was standing in the Oval Office watching him sworn in. It's been an epic journey. 2.5 years on that campaign, a decade of being ridiculed, he and I, and multiple decades of many of the parents that sit in this room. For all of those injured children, your day has come. The truth is now here. The sun is now shining, and the bright light of radical transparency is about to begin healing America. We're going to do everything we can to support this grassroots movement of so many brilliant thought leaders and truth tellers that have made this moment happen. Our goal is to create tools to help people learn to eat better. Right now, we just had a meeting just hours ago of doctors and scientists to put together a real food pyramid that isn't poisoning people and putting Fruit Loops and Captain Crunch above a steak. We're going to come up with a real food plan, and then we're going to look to change the school lunch program. Maybe Bobby will beat us to it inside of government, but if he doesn't, we're in a race against time. We're here to heal our children. Why are our children not eating whole food every single day? You've heard the stats over and over and over again. We're the sickest nation in the world. $4.5 trillion, 90% of which is chronic disease. Up, by the way, 60% this country suffering chronic illness. That was 12% in the 1980s when I was a kid. That is the greatest decline in recorded history of public health. And you were writing and not talking about it. So continue to not talk about it and let the podcasters, the truth tellers grow. And unfortunately, Kamala Harris didn't win, and her promise to censor all of those truth tellers didn't come true. Maybe privately you were praying they would win so that you could dominate and work for the same companies you have, hiding at least half of this story. We're going to build tools. We're going to build an ecosystem for true proactive health, working with every single practitioner that makes lifestyle change your first choice over prescribing you a drug. No one is here to take out the pharmaceutical industry or the giant industrial medical complex that is pushing drugs on our children starting in elementary school. 1 in 4 kids leaving elementary school will be on a drug the rest of their lives. I didn't grow up like that. There's no reason we should be like that, except that we let the pharmaceutical industry buy your news agencies. We let them buy up the hospitals. We let them buy up the government, the most powerful lobby in Washington. But today, they lose. And today, the people win. We're going to go with every single person that is on this planet to make people healthier. If you need a drug intervention, then maybe it took too long. We're going to get to the young people. But if you are going through drug interventions, you should be eating better. We're going to help with that. A national database of all the practitioners that are going to heal you. Real health care, not sick care. We're going to create media to support everything that Robert Kennedy Jr. is doing, because you'll probably be mandated to scream bloody murder every time a transparent study comes out. But we'll be counteracting that with the truth tellers that got us to this place. I hate to be so emphatic, but we've been ridiculed and lambasted by every one of you over and over and over again, while our children got sicker and sicker and sicker, and more of them died. 38,000 reported deaths for the COVID vaccine alone, and none of you are asking a question. How do they explain that? Wouldn't we pull any other product in the world? No. In America, we say, let's give it to the children now. Let's put it on the schedule for children who have a 0.0002% risk of death from COVID. These are shocking stats that I've never seen you report on. We'll see if you start reporting now that we have a truth teller inside of government. And we'll see if you start reporting as you watch this movement in the hands of the people, the MAHA movement, growing every single day. They're going to look for who's telling them the truth. They've seen who's lied to them. Maybe they can forgive you. I will if you start doing your job. Thank you. Yeah. Do we have a microphone? I don't know if we do. Oh, yeah, check.
Thank you. When is the last time you spoke with Secretary Kennedy about the link between vaccines and autism, and when is he going to release this retrospective study that you just spoke about?
To begin with, he's now inside the submarine known as the U.S. government, so I'm not going to be as in direct contact as I was throughout the campaign. But I will say this. I can't imagine that we've really discussed that specific issue inside of the last 6 months. And if we did, it would only have been, since we are so thoroughly understanding of, what we see there, it would only have been in my coaching him on how to discuss it when asked questions. And let me be perfectly clear. Our understanding is the same, as is in many of the doctors and scientists that I've interviewed. We don't know exactly what's causing autism. But what we do know is that it has to have a major environmental component to it. So it could be the chemicals in our food. It could be the fluoride in our water. It could be the pesticides and herbicides like glyphosate sprayed over 80% of our crops. It could be drugs. It could be Tylenol after you get vaccinated. It could be the vaccines itself. It could be a combination of the vaccines. It could be a combination of all of those things at the wrong time on the wrong day. None of which will we ever figure out in a totally corrupted regulatory agency that's owned, essentially, and driven and funded by the same corporations that make every one of the divisions of those products.
When is he releasing the study?
I think he has to do the study. And I have no idea how long that's going to take. I don't know who he has to talk to. I don't know if that's the first thing on the list. But it's going to be one of the first things that MAHA worldwide and MAHA.io will be demanding. Yes.
Oh.
Yeah, in the back.
Oh,
you have a mic. Right
real
here.
quick. Okay. Helena Bottomiller-Evich, Food Fix. I cover food policy.
Yeah.
Can you talk about the MAHA movement and whether or not you think there is sort of a mandate now to increase regulation of food chemicals? I focus mostly on food. What role you see food chemicals playing in this MAHA agenda? And then also talk about state advocacy. There's been a lot of bills coming up in the states.
Yes.
Focused on school meals and other things. Can you talk about the relationship between like how much focus you'll have federally versus the states?
Yeah. So we have, as if you're watching, we have a C4, which is MAHA Action. We just hired professional investigators and scientists to go through every single bill across America. And we will be listing on our website at MAHA Action every single bill we think should be either a pro-MAHA bill or an anti-MAHA bill. You're going to be able to track your representatives on how well they're voting on MAHA issues. All of that will be in a very easy-to-use dashboard of the United States, and you can click on where you live, and we're going to show you who you can call, and we are going to get this movement to be directly involved with issues of food safety, drug safety, water safety, air safety, and that will all be done by our legislative outfit at MAHA Action. As far as food chemicals, it's interesting. I've talked to several Republicans, and I will say I grew up a progressive liberal Democrat from Boulder, Colorado. I still consider myself an environmentalist. But I've talked to many Republican representatives in this journey and said, I always thought you guys were all, anti-regulations. I mean, if we're going to stop grass, generally recognized as safe, which means just put chemicals into our children's food and we'll figure out after millions of people are eating it if it's harmful, insane. Do Republicans now believe in regulations? And they've all said to me, when it comes to the health of our children, you're damn right we do. So I do believe you're going to see regulations working to fix this issue, yes.
Thank you, sir. So Senator Cassidy said his support for Secretary Kennedy was predicated on these commitments that Mr. Kennedy made to him about preserving existing vaccine structure and safety protocols. How does that align with what you're saying should happen with vaccines? Would maintaining those promises align with what you're saying?
I think it's, in some ways, maintaining the safety protocols and studies, I think he said, that'd be easy when you have none. So it's only going to improve. If he wants safe vaccines, then Robert Kennedy Jr. is going to make sure that we start doing proper safety trials. You have a real issue once a product is on the market, like the 72 vaccines. I think it's 16 or 17 vaccines given in ultimately 54 shots, 72 doses. It is unethical to now try and do a retrospective or try to do a study where you pull kids out and you don't vaccinate some because now you have an available product. And it also points out the issue with when you skip a placebo trial, you make it very difficult to ever do a real safety study. You can't do it. So once you haven't done it, now you're in a very difficult spot. I think they're going to have to figure out how to look at the databases, how to study VAERS, how to study the vaccine safety data link, and try to come up with some answers. But as I pointed out to you, even Senator Cassidy, who made those agreements on television, when faced with the actual science, changed his position. And I believe that Robert Kennedy Jr. absolutely will respect and always planned on respecting all the demands by Senator Cassidy. He has never promised he's going to go in and knock vaccines off of the schedule. What he's been talking about is radical transparency. And I think on that, he and Cassidy, Senator Cassidy, are aligned. And I think that they're going to be on a very interesting learning journey, as will all of the United States of America, as we watch the hidden secrets made public. Yeah, whoever.
Yeah, hi, Robert McGreevy, Daily Caller.
Hi.
You mentioned fluoride there. A National Toxicology Program study found that at levels of 1.5 milligrams per liter, it could be toxic for children, and yet the media still kind of covers it as a baseless conspiracy theory.
They actually said reduces IQ, and
Right.
the latest study shows is reducing IQ on a dose-dependent basis, which again is the best science you can have outside of a
Right, and despite
placebo
that,
study.
outlets like the Washington Post will call Robert F. Kennedy's thoughts on it conspiracy theories. What's your confidence that given these, if he does get these vaccine studies, it'll still be covered fairly?
My confidence is that the mainstream media is going to bankrupt itself if it keeps avoiding the topics that the people care about. And I think that these mainstream media outlets are slowly making themselves irrelevant. So they will either have to change course and start reporting on and starting to sound like the other investigators that are talking about these things, that are very important studies, EPA studies, or they're going to find themselves in a very difficult position of having nobody reading or watching what they do. That is the United States of America. That's capitalism. That's a true open market system. They can decide whether they want to report on the things that America cares about, and Americans that are now educating themselves on how to read these studies. Shows like mine keep putting the studies in their hands. We call it the high wire protocol. At the end of every one of my shows, if you're signed up to my email list, I send you every single document and trial and study and peer-reviewed piece of information that I addressed on my show. I'd like to see every single news agency do that. Show your work. Where did it come from? Who paid for it? Stop saying experts say. I mean, Woodward and Bernstein would have said, well, Nixon said he didn't tap the phones. We listened to the experts, moving on. That's not your job. If you keep doing your job like that, it's not going to last much longer. Yeah.
Hi.
Oh, well, you're back there. Yeah.
Selena Simmons-Duffin from NPR.
Hi.
Hi. So I understand that this is a pretty new organization, and you mentioned there's a website going up. There are clearly people in the room involved, and I'd love for you to just introduce some people and help us get an idea of like who to turn to if we're writing on food, or if we're writing on vaccines, if we're writing on different topics, so we have a sense for, you know, who all's here.
It's a pretty small group, really, right now. Bridget Rasmussen is the COO. Emma is our media person that got you all here. And the rest, I'll let them introduce themselves as they see fit in the future. Okay. Where are we at? I think you...
Just going back to vaccines real quick, I didn't know if you had any recommendations for Secretary Kennedy, either in the course of trying to do more safety studies, is maybe changing the scheduling for children or touching that at all. I didn't know if that's going to come up as one of your recommendations.
Well, I mean,
or
I think I'm making
discussions.
that point, right? I'm making that point with the Cassidy conversation. If he just said a mother shouldn't have to get a hepatitis B vaccine if she is hepatitis B negative. Let me make this clear. I lived in Los Angeles until I moved to Austin, Texas in 2019. I got calls maybe once a month from parents inside of major hospitals that were saying they're calling Child Protective Services on me because I'm refusing the hepatitis B vaccine. I'm hepatitis B negative. I don't see the purpose in this vaccine. And why are they calling Child Protective Services to say that I'm a bad parent? I think that Senator Cassidy, if he's a man of his word and what he just said in front of the cameras, should himself go about changing the schedule and saying this is now only recommended for parents that are testing, for mothers testing positive for hepatitis B. But that's up to them. But is that some radical change? That's just obvious science. There's a lot of things that should be looked at like that. And I think that Cassidy, since he said it publicly, even easier behind closed doors, the more information he gets, we'll see what happens to the schedule. Yes, in the back, he's been waving his hand a lot.
Thank you, and thank you for letting me join you in the gallery this morning for this historic moment. Alex Morozov, Aviva Partners. I have two quick questions. One is, Andrew Wakefield was reported that he's part of your team. Do you imagine a role for him in the new administration? And the second question is, obviously these placebo studies will take a long time, as you said. It can't be just 5 days. So in the meantime, is there a plan to maybe reduce coverage or de-emphasize some of the schedule, etc.?
I don't think. I mean, as I said, right now, Robert Kennedy Jr. and I think that this is a point too. I'll talk about strategy for a second. What good would it do even if he did want to go in and start pulling vaccines off the schedule? Then half this country would feel like he's just got a bias and going in. It wouldn't make sense. That's not going to achieve anything. That's a sand painting that's going to blow away 4 years from now when the next administration comes in. If you want lasting change, the people have to be involved in it. And Robert Kennedy Jr., and I traveled with him for 2.5 years, believes more than anyone I've ever met that the power should be in the hands of the people. That your choice and that you are capable and you're intelligent enough to make your own decisions and decisions for your children and your families as long as you're well informed. I do not believe his goal is to go in and be radical and take things away based on his opinion, as he said, and he meant it. If you start showing the nation the science, and you start saying it's your choice after knowing the science, then let us have the country that our founding fathers promised us. As far as Dr. Andrew Wakefield, who was my co-filmmaker and was the director of Vax, the film that ended up being about the CDC whistleblower, I haven't been in direct contact with him. He's not currently a part of our work or the administration, but I will say that I believe history is being rewritten on that story. I did an investigation to him when I was going to make Vaxxed, when I knew that in order to tell the whistleblower story, and he was the one that had already been working on it for 1.5 years, that I had to see what is this story really all about. And one of the great medical frauds is what happened to him. If you look it up, even the Lancet study is misreported. People say he committed fraud and that's why that paper was retracted. That paper said very clearly in it, this study does not prove a link between the MMR vaccine and autism. More studies need to be done on that. Yet not, I think, a single reporter in here has ever written that. As far as his work, I know Andy has really focused on media after having his license taken away. He was one of the doctors who was out there all by himself. Now there's thousands and thousands and thousands of doctors that are standing up together. This conversation is changing. And one day, I do believe we will look at that story and we'll recognize that there was a hero that stepped forward all by himself from a highly decorated family of doctors, and he told the truth. Yeah.
I wonder if you can talk a little bit about your own role and how you envision it. Do you see yourself as an outside advisor to Mr. Kennedy? Do you see yourself in the role of supporting his work or holding him to account? And then separately, there are some people who wish that he would focus on more, on less polarizing topics, like getting ultra-processed ingredients out of foods or ending the chronic disease epidemic, and that he would set the vaccine discussion aside. And I wonder if you can address that as well.
I don't know what his decisions are going to be once he is in there. I saw him speak with Rand Paul, who keeps asking for information on gain of function and exactly when and where and very specific FOIA requests. And I saw him say today at the Oval Office, they're still gaslighting me. I can't get it. And Bobby said, I'm going to walk down there this afternoon and make sure you get it. Those are the types of things he can do right away. And I think you're going to see this this holdup of transparency and information being held from our political representatives, being held from us. As far as my role, Bobby Kennedy and I are very good friends. I have always appreciated our relationship, and I am there for him in any capacity that he needs me, whenever, wherever, however. I will wait for him to decide what he needs from me. Right now, what he has said is, Del, I need you to go out and actually make America healthy again. Everything in here will be about regulations and trying to get the truth out. But if we don't get people eating better, if we don't get them to stop, taking way too many drugs, if we don't get them to start exercising, if we don't get them to start sleeping right, then I am not going to prove this point. Donald Trump has given Robert Kennedy Jr. 2 years to reverse the chronic disease epidemic. That seems like it would be almost impossible. I am going to attempt to work with all of the grassroots people that are out there, all of the different groups that have already done work. Maybe I don't have to do it at all. I keep saying I'm not here to reinvent the wheel. We are here to find all the greatest ideas, all the greatest practitioners that have learned how to get people to be inspired to change their habits around eating, their habits around exercise and sleeping. That's what I'm dedicated to. And I have said from the beginning, very early on when I was much younger, I once saw a document, I was watching PBS, and there was a CEO that trained CEOs, and he said, I learned from a CEO that trained me, he said, we can achieve anything in this company, anything we can dream of, as long as we don't care who gets the credit. That is how I've carried my life. That's why I just spent the last 2 years essentially taking, a back seat on all the work I do at the Highwire. I still did that show, but not speaking as much and not getting on stages because I knew there was someone that could do more than I could, and that's Robert Kennedy Jr. Yeah. How many more questions? 2 or 3 more questions? All right. I guess right here, and then make our way back.
Hi, Robert King with Politico. I wanted to talk with you about something different. You've talked about the issues with industry influence within HHS. What should be RFK's first action on day one to attack this influence? I mean, I know that FDA gets a lot of funding through the user fee program. That's under talks for reauthorization, I think, soon in the next couple of years. So what should be his first action on that?
Well, I mean, I think that there's a reason why you bring in a head of the FDA. We still need Marty Makary to take over that position. We still need Dr. Mehmet Oz to be confirmed for CMS. We still, need, I'm forgetting CDC's, Dr. Dave Weldon, Dave Weldon, who's also a good friend of mine I've known for years. We need them to take on those roles. What Robert Kennedy Jr. is he's great at leading teams of people. I was one of those people. He relies on their talent to do the job, and they'll be having discussions on how to best move forward. That's all I can say about that. It won't be him by himself. Yeah, right there.
Well, maybe picking up on that. I mean, talk to us about what you've told Mr. Kennedy about what should happen to the scientists and the health officials that have been overseeing the system. I mean, is it possible for him to get his agenda done if those people are still in their positions?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think, and I did some interviewing of candidates and just trying to help out and push people his way, and a few whistleblowers from inside of our regulatory agencies came to me, and they all said the same thing. They said, is it true that there is some revolving door where some of these scientists do things to maybe get a big job in pharma? Yes. But that's probably only 10% of your problem. Is it true that there's corruption and funding that they're getting, and they're getting kickbacks from some of the products that they make? Yeah, sure, that's happening, but that's probably 10% of your problem. And I heard this several times. They said 80% of your problem is this massive bureaucracy that is essentially like watching a substitute teacher come into the room in the classroom, and they think, well, you'll be gone in 4 years. We'll just sort of, stonewall and not move things, and nothing gets done. And that was said by people that have had the highest positions that are in there. I will also say, though, that when they spoke of Robert Kennedy Jr. and sometimes speaking to him, there was a light in their eyes. And they looked at him almost like a superhero and said, you are different. You might be able to do what I couldn't do because I still have to leave and run my legal practice that has pharmaceutical clients, and I still have to make sure I don't make anyone upset. But you, Robert Kennedy Jr., are not owned by any of the people that are trying to control these regulatory agencies. You might be able to just do what we all have dreamed about. We'll see. Yeah, sure.
I'm Lauren Weber with the Washington Post. I wanted to ask, you kind of talked about this a little bit, but how often do you think you and Kennedy will be talking going forward? Is that a couple times a week, a couple times a month, checking in?
I doubt it. Even when I was on the campaign, I didn't talk to him a couple of times a week. You know what your marching orders, and you go out and you get it done. I think he's going to be very busy. I will probably be more in touch with Stephanie Spear and trying to find out what they're trying to do in media and what their breaking stories are, and just making sure that we can amplify the conversations that are out there.
And one more, sorry to sag, but you mentioned that you don't know what the day one priorities are, but what would be your top 3 day one priorities?
I would say that for me, I would love to see the vaccine safety data link made public. I think that our government is supposed to work for us. It's of, for, and by the people. The CDC actually had that database right after the Institute of Medicine said they could do a vaccinated versus unvaccinated study. They moved it outside of government purview into some form of a private holding so that they're the only ones that can see it. I think that these databases, and same for NHS, all of our regulatory agencies across the world should make, it's all de-anonymized anyway so that people can study it. All of those databases should be made public so all the best scientists in the world from every university, whether funded by pharma or not, can do the studies. And I think that's going to be necessary to understand the transparency. We don't just want to see Robert Kennedy Jr.'s, study that he just came, found this. Well, I want to double check that. I want to see if that's true. I want to see if I can disprove that. That's the scientific method. And we can't have the scientific method if you keep only cherry picking what we get to see, cherry picking what scientists get to look at. So for me, the best thing to do would be to take those databases and make them public so all the best scientists in the world can look at them. 2 other things, I would say that he should immediately state that every doctor giving a vaccine has got to actually follow through with informed consent. My nonprofit's called the Informed Consent Action Network for a reason. I believe that the Nuremberg trials were important trials, and I believe that the document that every free nation signed on to, that we will never force any product or any procedure upon innocent people without them being fully knowledgeable about the benefits and the side effects of whatever they're doing, and in the end, they consent themselves. This vaccine program is destroying informed consent. You cannot, and by the way, it says right in there, no use of force or coercion is allowed. When you say to a parent, your child can't go to school unless they receive that vaccine, that is coercion. We are in defiance of the Nuremberg Code. So I would like to see him bring back informed consent, that you get to read this. You should be sent home with this. Next visit, your child will be receiving 6 or 7 of these all at one time. Why don't you read up on it? Why don't you see, and by the way, see if you find anywhere in here a study that showed giving all 7 of those together at one time. What studies were done for that? None. So informed consent is huge. I will always be fighting for that. I think if he did those 2 things, that'd be very powerful. And then ultimately, I do want to see that vaccinated versus unvaccinated study done. I've looked at and watched, there's a brand new one that came out of just about, I guess, a couple of months ago that looked at 9-year-olds in the Florida Medicaid system. And it showed really dose dependent. The more trips you took to a pediatrician for vaccinations, the higher your risk of neurological disorders and autism. I've looked at many, many studies. Science will say, well, that wasn't a well-powered study. Well, that wasn't a this. So experts say this. Those are signals. Those are signals that show that a better powered study should be done. CDC shouldn't discount that study. It should say, that is alarming. Why don't we do a well-powered study? Well, now we have someone in there that has those databases. We want to see those studies done. I think 2 more questions.
piggybacking on a lot of the questions, you and Senator Johnson, and obviously RFKJ, have made radical transparency the cornerstone of this whole movement. So do you foresee HHS and all the organizations under it, NIH, CDC, kind of following the suit of the Trump administration in these frequent press conferences? When something comes out like a study, there is a public press conference about it. Or the NIH, you know, we've even seen now Pete Hegseth kind of sitting at the desk telling people what's going on. Do you predict or foresee that the HHS will follow suit?
There's an advantage to telling the truth, which is something I've argued with friends and family about President Trump. There's something I recognize in him that I see similarly in myself and people like Robert Kennedy Jr. I've never turned down stepping in front of a camera. In fact, when I got involved with the health freedom movement after Vax was released, everyone was telling me, don't talk to the press, they're going to take your words out of context. And I said, if we don't talk to the press, then no one will know we're here. And I'll take the attacks, I don't care. In the end, when you're telling the truth, it's easy to talk to cameras. Donald Trump, President Trump jumps in front of cameras all the time. You cannot be lying and do that, or you have to remember, wait, what did I say the last time? You can't do that. When you see someone that just freely talks to the camera and answers any question, that's someone that's telling you their truth. Now, whether or not we could all argue where those facts, what it is coming from, but what you're seeing is what that person believes. Robert Kennedy Jr. is exactly the same. He doesn't have to practice what he's going to say. We've watched him do so many 3-hour interviews and just spews incredible amounts of knowledge from issues around the world. I've even had moments where he quotes Bhagavad Gita to help me get an idea. He is one of the most well-read human beings in the world. Dr. Mehmet Oz, I mean, he's a television host that speaks freely, knows what he's talking about. Dr. Marty Macri, these are people that I guarantee you love to talk to the cameras, are really good at it, and you are going to see transparency like you've never seen it before. One more, right there.
Hi, I'm Vitaly. I'm a founder of startup. We develop a neuro device to help kids with autism. And my question is, what type of treatment, according to your opinion, kids with autism should receive to provide the opportunity for them for the brighter future?
One thing that I've learned in the work that I've done around autism is that if you've met one autism child, you've met one child with autism. They are so vastly different in the issues that they're dealing with. And what works for one parent doesn't work for another. One of the things that I do find, a commonality is many of them say when they changed the diet, when they got the casein and they got the gluten out of diet, I've seen thousands and thousands of people say that's when my child started talking again. Now, you won't hear that in these newspapers because that means that it was an injury. See, the media has been telling us that this is genetic. You can't explain a genetic epidemic that changes over 40 years and increases from, 1 in, I think 40 years, be about 1 in 5,000 to 1 in 34. Yet that's what they've been told to say, and that's all the science that's being done, trying to find a genetic component that they cannot find. If you can heal a child, which I have met children that have been healed, then that means that this was an injury. And so I believe autism is an injury. It certainly must have a genetic component. Maybe there's a weakness that is there, which is why we should be doing science so that we can maybe do a blood test before you get a vaccine and say, you are actually susceptible. We are now under Robert Kennedy Jr. coming up with a system that's going to be safe for every child in this country. We're no longer going to accept casualties in order to achieve herd immunity. So I think that if you have devices, hopefully the NIH starts doing more investigations into the different things that people can use. I'm very careful to ever recommend anything. Number one, because I'm not a doctor. But number two, there's a lot of, desire for hope in what is oftentimes a hopeless situation. I think it's very easy for practitioners or people with anything to take advantage of that. So we have to be very careful. I don't know what your product does, but I would love to see NIH start investigating things like that. I want to thank you all for being here. I know, just like I know this about every pediatrician that isn't reading these and isn't handing these to their patients, They started that job because they cared about children. And they believe they're doing what's right. And I know that you got into journalism because you care about humanity, you care about this country, and you wanted to make sure that they were informed, you wanted to do what's right. But we cannot hide ourselves and stick our heads in the sand when the story doesn't go the direction we want it to go. And we cannot avoid looking the truth in the eyes and saying, you know what, I have to reconsider that. The moment we stop looking at science, we are now involved in a religion. And for anyone to believe that asking questions right now of a program where there's this many side effects and no placebo trials and small studies being done that show an increase in autism with vaccinations, then we need to reopen this investigation. And we need to reopen the investigation of the chemicals in our food. And we've got to analyze those regulatory agents and doctors and scientists that put this stuff into our environment, allowed this stuff on our grocery shelves, allowed these things to be injected into our kids without a proper study. Those people should never work for the United States government again. And only people that remember why they're here, that believe in the Hippocratic oath to do no harm, not harm to just a small group of people while we work towards the greater good. That is what do no harm means. You're not allowed to think of any other patient except the one sitting right in front of you. This one right in front of you might be injured today. It's a possibility. We all need to do everything we can to make sure that that child or that person is perfectly safe and never has to worry about being hurt. We can do this together. And when we do, we will once again be the greatest nation in the world. Thank you, and God bless America.